Hitler's authority. Of the 3 panzer divisions in Army Group B, 1 was stationed in Normandy and 2 were in the Pas de Calais. Those of Panzer Group West were deployed well behind the front, the 1st SS in Belgium and the 17th SS in the west of France. But both the 12th SS and the elite Panzer Lehr were stationed close enough to Normandy to be brought quickly to battle. The first Allied soldiers to land in France were advance units and pathfinders of the 3 airborne divisions. Yet despite the accuracy of the initial landings and the efforts of the pathfinder forces, many of the subsequent landings were widely dispersed. In both sectors, however, sufficient forces were available in the target zones to begin moving on their objectives almost immediately. In these, the first combat encounters of the Battle of Normandy, surprise and confusion were to prove valuable allies. While these actions were going on, the invasion fleet was moving up to the lowering positions, and the warships of the bombarding force ranging their guns on the enemy's coastal fortifications. Initially, shore bombardment would be directed by aerial observation. But amongst the first troops to land would be specially trained shore fire control parties. They would maintain contact between the beachhead and the ship's gunnery control officers, calling down fire where and when it was most needed. Also landing in the initial wave were the assault engineers. Their task was to clear pathways through the minefields and obstacles, to secure safe access to the beach exits for heavy equipment, and to open up routes inland. As the first wave of assault craft closed on the coast, the naval bombardment shifted inland, and a final deluge of rockets rained down on the shore. Yet despite the intensity and weight of fire, many of the German defences remained intact. Nowhere was this more true than at Omaha. Here, the surviving fortifications were manned by units of the 352nd Division. Pinned down by small arms and mortar fire, the American forces attacking Omaha were also bludgeoned by artillery batteries sighted well inland and in constant communication with forward observers overlooking the beach. Elsewhere, the landings were more successful. On Utah, the defences were weaker and more thinly garrisoned than on any other beach. German resistance was quickly overwhelmed and the beach secured. In the British sector, the landings were scheduled to take place an hour after the Americans touched down, and the naval bombardment was more intense and prolonged. Nevertheless, numerous well-sighted strongpoints remained, and the beaches came under heavy fire. On all the British beaches, the modified tanks and specialist engineering vehicles contributed greatly to the success of the initial assault. Throughout the morning of D-Day, clearways were progressively widened, pillboxes and strongpoints demolished, and the beach exits cleared of debris and obstacles. By midday on June the 6th, the Allies had seized many of their primary objectives and penetrated inland from 4 of their 5 beachheads. East of the Orne, the 6th Airborne held a commanding salient some 3 miles deep and 2 wide. But from Sword Beach itself, the British had only managed to penetrate a mile inland. This was less than Montgomery had hoped for, and would inevitably jeopardize plans to capture Caen on D-Day. On Gold and Juno, the beachheads were more substantial, but pockets of fierce German resistance still remained to be liquidated. At Le Hamel, where a complex of fortified buildings and pillboxes overlooked Gold Beach, one company of the 352nd held out well into the afternoon. In the American sector, operations were complicated by problems of terrain. West of the Veer, efforts to expand Utah were hindered by a belt of marshes and flooded land lying directly behind the beachhead. Units of the 101st Airborne had captured the western exits of 4 causeways leading inland from the beach, but these proved too narrow for rapid exploitation. Further west, elements of the 82nd Airborne had seized Sainte-Mère-Église, but more than half of the division still remained dispersed, and many of its objectives were still held by the Germans. On Omaha, the situation was critical. Only a small proportion of the assault force had been able to get ashore. No more than a few unfortunate battalions of the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions. On high ground, overlooking the beach, elements of the 352nd held a number of surviving forward defences. These commanded both the beach and the seaward approaches. None of the exits from the beach had been taken, and American penetration amounted to no more than a few precarious salients. The fate of Omaha hung in the balance for the rest of the day. Offshore, a force of battleships and cruisers laid down a curtain of fire a few miles inland. The objective was to seal off the beachhead and isolate the remaining defenders from any further reinforcement or resupply. Simultaneously, destroyer groups closer inshore attacked strongpoints and fortifications overlooking the beach. The landing of vehicles and supplies was suspended. Instead, further assault troops and tanks were sent in. By mid-afternoon, the situation on Omaha was no longer quite so critical. Naval gunfire had proved decisive. The forward defences were shattered, and American troops were at last pressing inland. Throughout the course of D-Day, only 2 German fighters were seen over the beachhead. In contrast, Allied air power was brought to bear on the battle with devastating effects. Nearly 15,000 sorties were flown in the first 24 hours. Enemy troop concentrations and armoured columns were attacked ceaselessly. The deployment of reserves was disrupted, and bottlenecks created by wrecked vehicles caused confusion and delays. At the eastern end of the beachhead, the advance south from Sword was running well behind schedule. 21st Panzer had been mobilized within a few hours of the first airborne landings, but it was not effectively deployed until late in the morning. Elements were sent northeast to counterattack the airhead, and anti-tank guns were deployed on high ground commanding the approaches to Caen. The city itself was defended by the panzer artillery, while the main body of armour